Welcome to the Supply Chain Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Sheri Hinish, also called the Supply Chain Queen, and I'm super excited to introduce Rada from Inchainge, who is going to talk about why simulation is actually the missing layer, not only in supply chain, but in the development of supply chain talent. Rada, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So happy to be here.
Amazing. So I have been familiar with Inchange for many years now. For folks who are just tuning in and learning about Inchange for the first time, can you kick off, tell them a little bit about yourself and then also Inchange?
Yeah, happy to do so. Well, my name's Rada. I am based in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And I originally come from Bulgaria, where it went in Eastern Europe, but then I actually moved to the US for 1 year to live there in Wisconsin, of all states. But then I came back for my studies here in the Netherlands, where eventually I met Inchainge, which is the company that made me fall in love with supply chain. And Inchainge itself is a company that provides experiential learning solutions. What that means is that we really provide hands-on learning for students and professionals across the globe. And we just try to make supply chain learning more fun and really just more memorable.
Yeah, amazing. I think what was really interesting was why traditional supply chain education falls short. So why is a company like Inchange inexistent? And one of the things that we've uncovered in the Student Voices series is that there's a gap between what universities teach about supply chain management, which can often be
Mm-hmm.
lagging, but then
Mm-hmm.
what companies need from day one. And they need to understand the context in which
Yeah.
systems change happens, the context in which decisions are made. So tell me a little bit about how in change the simulations force participants to really think about cross-functional executive roles where every decision,
Yeah.
creates that handoff between business functions.
Yeah, well, you described it really well, I think. And when you go into a business simulation, what that really is trying to mimic as much as we can, of course, the complexities of supply chains in real life. They are difficult and they're complex and there's just so many things about them. I'm sure you'll agree. But when it comes to hands-on learning, you give the participants the chance to take over a virtual company. And in that virtual company, they take the role of a vice president of a certain department. And all of a sudden, they're not just day one hire, they're the vice president of a certain function within the company. And that really, first of all, puts you outside of your comfort zone, but it forces you to think about the bigger picture. And oftentimes what we see is that people go in very firefighting mode and they get they start changing things. They're fixing their own problems. Oh, supplier here is bad. Warehouse is a mess. Let me just fix everything. And the nice thing about our experience is that we put people in a team setting. So you're actually working with people. And what oftentimes happens after people see their results, because the whole goal of a simulation is to simulate something, right? So when people take decisions in this company, we run a calculation and we pretend as if 6 months in time have passed and you've been taking these decisions for that time. And what people come across in the beginning is just so funny because they thought they did a good job and all of a sudden it all just went to the drain, fully bankrupting the company even worse than what they started. And that's really the power of experiential learning, is that you can have this sandbox environment to lose millions, to have warehouse issues, and to have sustainability as part of it as well, and bring it to life. And I think that's where this learning method really stands out compared to traditional supply chain learning, which can be very boring. As speaking as a non-supply chain person, I think for me, hands-on learning is definitely the best way to be faced with this complexity.
Yeah, I think that you're calling out something really important because in the age of AI and automation, what I find is a lot of people lack the preparedness and the context in which decisions are made. So, really important. And another thing, one of the core thesis of In Change is that silos are the root cause of supply chain underperformance. So, Can you draw out maybe a couple examples from leading a simulation or maybe some hard-earned lessons from clients you serve?
I think that really links to the start of Inchainge and how our co-founder came up with the idea. And he was in a role where he had to talk to all these people, all these functions within supply chain. And he very quickly realized this misalignment issue that they don't talk to each other. And of course, instead of showing them a lecture or a PowerPoint presentation or a book, he just went in and decided to do something different. And we've even had cases where after training, we've inspired a client of ours to change their KPI system and go for more cross-functional KPIs, which is really inspiring to see that such a, fun experience can also develop such very critical thinking about how we do things in the company and how can we step back from what we're used to.
Right. And you mentioned cross-functional KPIs. It's interesting because Inchange works with Fortune 500 companies also. More than 40% of the world's top 100 manufacturers have actually trained employees using your simulation. What surprises you the most about the difference between how students and seasoned executives experience these games?
Yeah. I'm in the between stage of graduating, not too long ago and now being a professional working with multinationals. And inside our company, we also separate these groups and we have a team for universities, we have a team for professionals. But in reality, from my experience, being a guest lecturer as well, I see so many similarities. You would be surprised. You think, oh, they're so different. You'll say students, oh, they're not experienced. They're young. They're cool. And, professionals are more experienced. They know what they're doing. They know the data and how to analyze it. But the human behavior part of it is still very siloed in the beginning of the experience. And then once you start figuring out that you have to be more aligned, then you immediately see in the training how the buzz just goes up in the room and people start talking, bringing their laptops to each other, coming up with strategies. So I actually think they're a lot more similar. And one downfall to that is at the same time, while this is, it's a sandbox learning, so you can do whatever you want. But people, I think that comes maybe from traditional training, they're still very conservative in what they do. They're afraid to fail, even though this has no consequence on your real job. You're not going to get fired from a virtual company, right? So they're still both students and professionals. They just want to do well. They want to get a good ROI score. They want to not make mistakes. That's unavoidable. And then obviously it has consequences, but these teams are the ones that learn the most. And by the end of the experience, because they've tried a few bad scenarios, they end up with a positive ROI.
Yeah, and I think also the cool thing, like I said, I've done the simulation. I think in the simulation you can recover. You can't always recover in the real world. So it's important that throughout this process, the other tools like communication, change management, all of the very human-centered skills, I call them core skills, the core skills that you need, those are also influenced throughout the process also. All right, let's talk about AI and circularity because you recently launched some AI-powered tools within the platform, including an AI tutor and some of the dynamic debriefing capabilities, which is really, really amazing. And so there's all these new developments, new additions that can really be additive to the learning experience. Tell us a little bit about this and what do folks really need to understand if they're in a supply chain role right now about AI and circularity that my generation didn't understand?
Yeah, so when you mention generation in the question, it's quite, it becomes hot immediately, so to say. But when it comes to the sustainability topics, first of all, and we really started integrating them with circularity and full end-to-end sustainability into our games about 7 or 8 years ago, you notice from my experience in training in the beginning, especially when you have, let's say, a more senior experienced group from a different generation, you have people, you ask them, raise your hand if you think your role involves sustainability, and no one is raising their hand. And the 4 people that raise their hand are the ones that work in the sustainability department. And then once they're put in an environment where forget ROI, forget efficiency, all of a sudden your core KPI is, let's say in our case, true return investment. So all the positive and negative impact you create on society, on the planet, on prosperity, all of a sudden, the context changes. And you can't really do that in the real world because you still have a lot of other things to deal with. But if you are put in this environment and you start experimenting with every decision I make, it has to link to sustainability, then something changes in the mindset, because by the end of the training, everyone raises their hand and they realize what role they play in sustainability, whether they're in procurement, whether they're in operations, in supply chain, in sales, in marketing. It all is connected and everyone can really bring a positive impact. So that's really beautiful to see. And that's one of the main reasons I really joined Inchainge, is for this sustainability angle on supply chain.
Yeah, it's amazing. But can you give us a flavor for the type of circular metrics that might be tracked that are integrated into the simulation?
Yeah, we really look at how do you go from a linear to a circular, value chain. And then we measure things like return on material. We measure the impact of your materials that you use for your product. So how circular they are. Are they easy to refurbish, or are they recyclable? So then again, you shift the whole focus and say, just build a circular value chain, see what happens. And then you think, maybe I need different revenue models. So then even though you are playing it in a game, you always try to connect it to the real world, because you have to find these connections so the learning is memorable and then you can apply it to what you do.
Amazing. And you also mentioned an AI tutor. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think AI is really sprinkled into everything right now, and companies should definitely experiment with it. But when it comes to using AI for education purposes, it's a very two-edged sword, because on the one hand, and of course we work with universities, teachers are afraid that the students are going to cheat using AI. But even for professionals, we use a lot of systems in our jobs that have AI input. And because of this, we took it really seriously on how we handle AI. And we created an AI task force, which I'm a part of. And in the beginning, I was thinking, let's just put a chatbot in the game and everyone can have their questions answered. But then you realize, but that is not the goal. So what we did is that we created the AI tutor, where when a student or a learner asks a question, the AI tutor will reply like a teacher. And how do you think teachers reply, Sheri?
I don't know. I'm a teacher and I try to reply with empathy and kindness, but I can only imagine if it's an AI tutor, it's probably very to the point.
Yeah, right. Well, that's I think in chatbots especially, but in our case, we try to reply with more questions. So instead of giving a blank answer, we just make people think more of how to answer their own question almost. We of course give them some background, but ideally also answering their own questions. So that's how we tackled AI for education.
What's the biggest misconception about supply chain talent today?
Well, what is supply chain talent? Supply chain talent is probably different today than what it looks like before. And it's more than just having your certifications and having the theory down. It's also having different core skills, maybe as you say, or communication. And I think supply chain talent should be looked as a broader thing, even including non-supply chain people or people from different backgrounds, people with technological knowledge, because that can really help you in nowadays very dynamic world. So yeah, I think it's not what it used to be.
Yeah, I agree with you. And second question, what is one thing that every supply chain leader should unlearn?
Unlearn. Well, I think supply chain people know it all as the stereotype goes, but perhaps that optimizing your own function makes the whole supply chain better. I think oftentimes it's a very stubborn habit to just firefight and keep fixing your own things. And in reality, you're actually working with your peers whose KPIs are pulling in the totally different direction. So I think, and our co-founder also has a very good quote on that, because he says that supply chain people are oftentimes like heroes or heroines trying to save the day. But he says, don't save the days, solve the issue. So just
Yeah,
really
I love that.
think bigger than
Yeah,
that.
I love that. I think for some people who are just in one function, that's the other thing where you've been in that role for 18 months, 2 years, maybe longer. Please rotate. Like go to
Yeah,
another function, explore, get
yeah,
as much experience as you can. You
yeah,
can really get your hands dirty and you can start to see what really happens and also a lot of the human behavior dynamics.
yeah,
Yeah, super cool. Okay,
yeah.
last question. What
Yes.
excites you most in the next 5 years about supply chain education?
I have to say that people are looking for new ways to educate themselves on supply chain, and those ways are more practical and more hands-on, and definitely there's more application needed in education, whether that's in universities or corporates. People just want to practice their skills, just experiencing it, and also experiencing it together with other people. So you get different backgrounds, you put yourself in each other's shoes, you create this empathy, understanding. I think that's very exciting that we're being more social about learning and also trying to make it more fun.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Rada, for sharing. How can folks get in touch with you or even start to take the next step for learning about Inchange, the resources, and all the great things that we've talked about today?
Yeah, well, more than happy to connect on LinkedIn with people. And if there are any questions for the whole company, you can definitely visit our website, inchange.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Rada, for joining and take care. All the best.
Thanks so much, Sheri.